And we're live.
Excellent. We'll just wait for some attendees to start to hop on.
I'm predicting a quick meeting.
Yeah, well, I like where your head's at on that, Mr. Swanton. Members of the Zoning Board of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals and ladies and gentlemen logging on as attendees, members of the public, allow me to say welcome and good evening. It's 7 o'clock, our appointed hour for the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals for the hearing of January 25th. The published start time is 7 p.m. So what we like to do is take a moment, let folks log on and allow people to populate the attendee roster. My name is Rob Ciampetti. I'm the chairman of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'll take a moment and introduce the board members that are here this evening, as well as members of the planning department and our tireless and fearless keeper of the minutes. And we will get into our agenda. Basically, if you haven't attended a Newburyport or any zoning board or public hearing via Zoom, allow me to lay out a quick landscape as a bit of a quick roadmap so that you know what to expect, so to speak. So what we'll do is I'll begin by calling the roll, establishing that we have a quorum, which means we have a legal basis to conduct the city's business this evening before us. And once we establish that we have a quorum, I'll then take roll and we will we'll get right into our public hearings. We have no business hearing matters to deal with first. Business matters of the board first. So we'll get right into our published hearings. Before I do that, I'd like to take a moment and just walk for mostly the benefit of those that are unfamiliar. If you are logging on and you plan to speak or wish to speak in connection with an application, or you just haven't done one of these, I lay out sort of the format and how we flow. So without further ado, I'm going to take the roll and I'll ask the members of the ZBA to please respond if you are present by saying either here or present. And we'll start with Mr. Mark Moore.
Here.
Mr. Stephen Delisle.
Here.
Ken Swanton.
Present.
Mr. Walter Channon.
Here.
And I note that Associate Member Gregory Bennick is absent this evening. My name is Rob Ciampetti. I'm also here. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members. That is a quorum. And also for the legal record with respect to all the applications going forward, the 5 voting members, of course, will be the only 5 members in attendance. So without further ado, I'll go right into sort of the lay of the land. I'd like to take a moment and just introduce other members of the panel that you'll see on the meeting this evening. Mr. Andy Port, our planning director. Caitlin Sullivan, our city planner, and also in attendance we have Gretchen Joy, our keeper of the minutes. Mr. Mark Moore is our board vice chair. Mr. Stephen Delisle is our secretary. Mr. Ken Swanton, ZBA member, and Mr. Walter Bud Shannon, ZBA member. So without having done that, let me just give you the quick lay of the land for how these things flow. I'll begin by reading the legal notice. That's the published notice, and it's an abridged version of what applications before us. To begin with, we always follow the agenda sequence unless there's some accommodation we've made otherwise, and we would let everyone know if that was the case. But we'll follow that agenda. I'll begin by reading the legal notice by name of applicant, by the address, and then the docket number, and a brief descriptor of what relief is being sought, so that if you're listening, you know what it is the applicant's seeking relief from the Zoning Board of Appeals, whether it's a special permit or a variance or a blend of both, or a special permit for non-conformities. I'll let everyone know by just stating as much, and then I always attach a brief descriptor that's from the legal notice as to what it is exactly the applicant seeks. All necessary permits to build X or to change Y, so that you understand, everyone can understand more, more or less the context of what's being asked. After I read the legal notice, I turn the floor over to the applicant or the applicant's representative to present the application. That's when either the applicant themselves or their attorney or architect or engineer or a blend of all of the above will present to the board the application. After the completion of that, we close that portion of the public hearing. I then go to the public comment section. That's when we will put up a slide that just describes the kind of rules of engagement when it comes to public comment. We invite everyone who wishes to speak to simply raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. click on raise hand. I'll see that your hand's raised, and then I'll recognize you by name, or if you're a call-in attendee, I'll recognize you by the last 4 digits of your telephone number. At which point you'll have the floor. We ask that you give your name and address for the record so that Ms. Gretchen Joy can record your thoughts. Don't feel as though you need to come down on a pro or con column. You needn't pick a side, just simply let us know what you're thinking. Know, though, that from a format standpoint, if you pose a question and we invite you to do so, know that we're not being discourteous when we don't respond directly to answer that question. From a format and flow standpoint, your public comment includes a question. Know full well that the members of the ZBA, all of us, will be listening attentively, and we will likely adapt and almost recount part or parts of your question. So you'll find that in the next section of the hearing, when it's open to questions from the board, that you'll hear your question in one form or another. So know well that we hear you, that we're taking notes, and you may hear your question addressed in that format. Andy, what's the code for those that are calling in by phone if they want to open their mic? Because on Zoom it's one way, and if you're calling in by telephone, what's the method to do that?
Yeah, generally folks are going to want to press *6 to raise their hand, and then *9 to unmute. And we can also identify those folks by their last digit, a couple of digits, just to let them know.
Okay, great. So, and don't worry if you didn't write that down, but it appears that *6 will raise your hand, and then we'll identify you and we'll walk you through anything else you need to know. So once we have questions from the board, oh, and by the way, in the interest of balance and in the interest of efficiency, but also to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak and be heard, we ask that everyone who wishes to speak, please try to govern your comments to within 2 minutes. I do have and will almost always exercise discretion to sort of ebb and flow with that. But we do ask the courtesy that you kindly govern yourselves accordingly. Try to keep your comments within that respectful timeline. Be thorough, but just know that there are other folks that we're duty bound to hear from and would like to hear from. So with that, we would close the public comment portion of the hearing. We then go to questions from the board. That's when members of the ZBA in sequence, and I'll call upon each member of the ZBA to pose any questions they may have. This is when they'll ask questions of the applicant or the applicant's representatives. This is also when members of the public, if you've voiced your comments, you may well hear your thoughts and any questions you may pose or any follow-up matters voiced by members of the ZBA. So know well, that's the sort of integration of your portion of that process and your involvement as public comment. We then close that portion of questions. Once we complete questions from the board, we go to deliberations after that. Deliberations is when the public and all of us just listen to the board deliberate the legal criteria and the application on its merits out loud. So it's a full disclosure, fully out loud discussion among the board members on whether or not the applicant has met the legal criteria in posing their application, whether the board feels as though it's a complete application, it's met the criteria that we have to run, the lens through which we have to run each application: variance, special permit for non-conformities. We talk that out loud. Once we've completed deliberations, we then close that portion of the public hearing and go to the final portion, which is the voting section. And under a modified Robert's Rules of Order, I will then invite a motion to approve from a member of the ZBA. Know well, though, that in doing so, that doesn't mean that neither I nor the member of the ZBA who poses that motion to approve plans to support the application, but rather it's just the mechanism by which it is brought to the floor for a vote. So it's always brought in the affirmative. So it's always a motion to approve. That motion is then seconded, and then I call the roll. In order for an application to be successful, 4 ZBA members must vote in the affirmative. So in this case, this evening, that means 4 out of the 5 members here must vote yes in order for the application to pass, and for the motion to carry the application to pass. So with that, we've kind of walked through the lay of the administrative land. We will jump right into our first 2 applications, one at a time, of course, because the first 2 in our sequence, I believe we have a request for continuances. So we'll take care of those first, so that anyone who may be here planning to speak in connection with those applications, we hopefully are trying to pay the courtesy of making sure that folks aren't just waiting around only to find out that an application is not going to go forward. So with that, I believe we have a request from the applicant's attorney on the matter for 4 Plum Street. It was continued from December 14th to this evening. It's a modification of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. Attorney Mead, may we proceed on a vote on the request to continue? And I think, did you have a date as well? Was it February 8th?
Yes, thank you. That would be fine, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. So members of the ZBA, on the applicant's attorney's request, the matter of 4 Plum Street, they ask that the matter be continued to the hearing date of February 8th. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Moore.
Ken Swanton.
Okay, motion is made by, was that? by
Mr.
Chen?
Moore.
Oh,
Mr.
Mr.
Moore.
Moore, motion is made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Swanton, calling the roll on the motion to continue 4 Plum Street to February 8th. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
and Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 to the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and that application will be coming back on the hearing of February 8th. Thank you. The next matter is the matter of Brad Kutcher, 344 Merrimack Street. The applicant's representative is Nick Cracknell from Keystone. This matter was continued to this evening from the hearing of December 28th. It's a 2-prong application, a variance on lot area and rear yard setback, as well as a special permit for nonconformities, expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. I understand late, though it was this late afternoon, that Mr. Cracknell, you too are requesting further time to refine your application, and you're requesting a continuance?
That's correct.
Would you like us to, now, as I think you're aware, the board has undertaken, and by next meeting, we will most likely formalize an endeavor to limit our docket number of hearings per evening to no more than 5 applications, in the spirit of applications becoming more granular and detailed and thorough. The board wishes to respond in kind by being more granular, detailed, and thorough. And it's just, it's a challenge to do that beyond 5 applications. So as we just continued 4 Plum Street to that evening, we're now at 5. I will put it to the board because I suspect that you'd like to be heard on possibly coming on the 8th, or would you be amenable to being continued to the 28th of February?
Mr. Chairman, would it be possible for us to be put on the 8th, and we're willing to wait? And if nobody else drops out of that meeting or the meeting goes long, we understand we would get continued to the later meeting of the month, if that's possible.
I will put that, it's, kind of a special request, and I want to be, balanced and fair, and but I will put it to my colleagues, and we'll see what we'll see where the wind's blowing. All right, so I guess members of the ZBA, the applicant wishes us to undertake the motion to continue, would like to be on the 8th. We'll concede the 28th. Mr. Moore, we'll start with you. Any thoughts on that, or how does the board wish to proceed?
I don't have it in front of me either, but we can do this now. I believe one of the 5 that's already on the docket would be a continuance for State Street of a variance request, which to me would maybe provide a little room to add this in on the 8th. I don't anticipate that being more than a few seconds to do, but that's where I stand. If that's the case, then I think we could do it on the 8th.
Okay.
I don't want to leave it to, if, maybe we can, maybe we can't. I'd rather just decide to do it or not. And I'm good either way. But I was just asking if one of the 5 was that, my words, placeholder for the appeal for that variance there. If that's the case, that shouldn't take too long. So.
Okay. Mr. Delisle, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm okay either way. I think that Mr. Moore presents a good procedure there that, provided the State Street application is one of our applications on that evening, that then we would have time for the continuance of this application to February 5th.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton and Mr. Shannon, do you have any thoughts to the contrary?
I'd like to make a comment, Ken
Please.
Swanton, which is, last time around, this was a very long presentation. So I don't think we should start this topic any later than 10:30 is my only caveat. So if we have a cancellation and we get through stuff, great. But I don't think we should start this one late.
All right. That seems fair. Mr. Shannon, you have any thoughts beyond that?
No, I'm okay with moving it to the 8th. I think also we run a pretty high percentage of people that drop out at the last minute. So I think with State Street being on there and the chance of someone else dropping out.
All right.
We should be
Sounds
okay.
So, Mr. Cracknell, it sounds like as long as we can get your flight off the gate by 10:30, we won't have to bump you to the next day. Does that
That's
seem fair?
fantastic. We
All right.
appreciate that. Very fair.
All right. Well, thank you for flying. So we'll put you on to, we'll undertake the motion to put you on for the 8th with that caveat. And thank you for indulging us the time to sort of feel this out. Do we have a motion to continue the application on 344 Merrimack Street to February 8th?
So moved. Ken Swanton.
I'll second that, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton and Mr. Delisle. Motion's made and seconded. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Matters continue to February 8th. Thank you all. And thank you, Nick, for your patience as well. And members of the public that may be here intended to speak in connection with that. If you didn't catch this, the board has just continued that matter, pardon me, for the hearing on February 8th. This is not uncommon on a complicated application that is undergoing more refinement and such. So if you were here to speak on that, just please know that we will be taking it up on the 8th, and we will look forward to hearing from you then, and we'll certainly hear from everyone then. Okay, moving on then, we'll go to our first application that's going to presumably go forward. This is the, I'll read the legal notice. This is the application of Sarah and Michael Dinsmore, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The application is 34 Ashland Street, and it's a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant seeks all necessary permits to renovate and extend an existing single-family home. And maybe we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of Sarah and Michael Dinsmore, who are virtually here with me this evening. The architects on the project or design group on the project is MPG Design, Phineas and Mindy Gay, and they're not able to be here this evening. So you get to work with me on the architectural discussion. If you go to the first slide, please. The property is at 34 Ashland Street. It's at the corner of Ashland and Coolidge Street. Michael and Sarah proposed to construct a one-story addition on the side of their home, along with a dormer, and undertake some renovations. The applicant is requesting a special permit, as the chair indicated, for nonconformities under Section 9. The property is located in the R2 zoning district under the ordinance and was constructed on or around 1927. In 1998, there was an addition added to the north side off of Coolidge Street, which is where the proposed new addition is going. So that's going to be the renovation is on that existing little bump out that I'm going to show you in a minute. The property is a corner lot and has existing nonconformities for primary front yard of 5 feet where 25 feet is required. That's the Coolidge Street side. Secondary front yard, which is the Ashland Street side, of 15 feet where 25 feet is required. The rear yard setback of 4 feet where 25 feet is required, and lot area of 4,140 where 10,000 is required, and lot coverage of 29% where 25% is required. If you go to the next slide, please. So on this site plan, as you can see on Coolidge Street, you'll see the deck, and then you'll see that little bump out. That little bump out was added in 1998, and that's where the addition is going to go. So this is a good overview of that. So you see the primary front yard at Coolidge Street, secondary front yard at Ashland Street, and the house sits nicely there on the corner. Next slide, please. So here we have the existing conditions. This view is not going to change at all. This is the view from Ashland Street. Next slide, please. And this is the view from Coolidge Street. The addition in a moment you're going to see will be put on the right-hand side of the structure where that current little bump out is and where the deck is. Also from this view, in a minute, we'll show you the dormer, which is a dormer that meets the city's guidelines. is on the right-hand side of this roof view. Next slide, please. And here is the existing rear elevation, which would be opposite Coolidge Street. Next slide, please. And then this would be the left side elevation as you face it from Ashland Street. And next slide. And just to give you some context with real photographs there, we have the view from Ashland Street. And again, this view isn't going to change at all. Next slide, please. And we have the view from Coolidge Street. And again, you can see the little bump out that was added, the deck, and the side of the roof that will have the dormer added to it. Next slide, please. And here's a view looking back at the house where that addition will be added and the dormer will be installed. Next slide, please. So as I said, the applicant is proposing to add a one-story, 123 square foot addition off the existing bump out on the north side off of Coolidge Street. And then it fills in an existing gap. I'm going to show you that in a minute too, thereby intensifying and extending the primary front yard setback to the 5 feet. A dormer will also be added along the same roof line on the interior side of this elevation. And the proposed dormer meets the guidelines and exemption under the city's demolition ordinance. The lot coverage will also be intensified slightly from 29% to 32%. And the DCOD was not triggered in this application. Next slide, please. So in this view, you can see the proposed addition, and that's on the right-hand side of the structure. You can see it kind of comes around that addition, and that little tail off the new addition is where it gets filled in so that that front elevation off of Coolidge Street has a continuous line along the street there. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea, here are my maps to my NAPS view. This is the plan view. And then the next slide, please, is the GIS view. So you can generally see the neighborhood that this structure exists. And next slide, please. So here we have, again, the view from Ashland Street. These are the proposed conditions. Nothing is happening on this view, on this elevation. Next slide, please. And here's where the addition is going. So we have the addition off the back, or it's actually the front side yard, sorry, because it's on Coolidge Street. So you can see the addition as I explained earlier, and you can see the dormer at the top, which again meets the guidelines under the ordinance. You can see it's finished with similar shingles as is the rest of the house, and architectural shingles on the roof. And then you can see the little wooden step that goes down off the side to egress out of the proposed addition. Next slide, please. And this is from the right-hand view, which is the side, but would be the rear off of Ashland Street. So this is the side off of Coolidge Street. And again, you can see the proposed addition with the dormer on the top. And as you can see, it's just a slight 123 square foot addition off the back of the house. Next slide, please. And this is the opposite view. So this is the view if you're coming down Ashland Street towards Merrimack Street. And you can see the addition on the rear and then the dormer on the third floor. Next slide, please. So in accordance with section 9B2 of the ordinance, of course, we can't create any new nonconformities, and no new nonconformities will be created. As I noted, that front yard setback on Coolidge Street is exacerbated along that front line to the 5-foot mark of the original structure. The applicant also can show that the proposed modification is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. Again, the addition is a modest 123 square feet. It comes off the existing addition off the north side of the structure. And while the addition intensifies both the primary front yard and the lot coverage, again, it's a small increase. Both the adjacent structure on Coolidge Street and the structure across the street on Coolidge Street are set back from their property lines, and the addition will have minimal impact on each of them. A view of the neighboring structures, as I showed earlier, revealed that many of the structures have similarly added small additions on their homes. Here, the applicant seeking to make minimal impacts, but by receiving significant advantage within the interior of their home. I've also provided 2 letters of support from the properties on either side on Ashland Street, both across on Coolidge and then directly beside on Ashland Street at 32 and 36. So the applicant requests the board's consideration that the proposed addition is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure, and would request your approval of the application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. Closing that portion of the public hearing, we're going to now go to public comment, and I'll ask Andy Port, our city's planning director, to kindly put up the slide. These are the instructions that I had mentioned on public comment. Anyone who wishes to speak, just kindly click raise hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll recognize you and open the floor to you. Anyone wishing to speak either for or against or just in connection with, going once, going twice. I see still no hands. I will go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing, and we'll go right into questions from the board. We'll begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Attorney Mead, I just have one question I believe I know the answer to, but I'm not an attorney. I just wondered if you could just explain for the record why the front yard setback shrinks even though you're not creating a new non-conformity.
It doesn't actually shrink. If we can go to the site plan, please. So it's, well, it shrinks because the sideline is, can you blow that up by any chance, Caitlin? So I can. So you'll see the 5 feet at the corner of the existing structure.
Right.
And then again, that 5 foot gets carried along the same property line, which actually is at an angle in.
So it's because of the way the house is situated and the
Correct.
property line.
That's correct.
Okay. But I don't have any other questions.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had one question, and I may have missed this in the presentation, but I was wondering what the current square footage of the house is.
So I'm going to look at the current square footage of the house according to the assessor's records, Mr. Delisle, in living area. All right, I'm going to use the living areas. Well, I'll give you both, just so the assessor's records say the living area is 1,748 and the gross area is 3,480.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. That's it for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Yeah, I had a question, kind of in the vicinity of Mr. Moore's question, but I took a walk around the neighborhood today, and the property line is kind of back off the sidewalk. The house is up a hill. It's kind of a side street. So I wound up not really having a question. So I'm fine. No questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Shannon?
Yeah, just one quick question. Using the drawing that's up now that we're looking at, how big is the old deck? Is it similar to the footprint of the proposed addition, or is it slightly smaller? Or do you know?
I don't know, but we could go back to the existing conditions plan, Caitlin.
It looks like the addition is 8 feet.
Yeah.
Okay, so that looks actually bigger.
Yeah, the deck, well, and then you add the steps off. So I think the
Yep.
deck might be a little bigger.
Yeah,
Mr.
okay.
Shannon.
I was just trying to get scale when I was looking at it. I was looking at the deck, and I was wondering in my mind's eye if the addition was bigger. It looks like it's probably smaller.
Yeah, the owner just texted me and the deck is larger than the addition.
Great. All right, thank you. No other questions, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shannon. I don't have any further questions, other than the 1 or 2 that were already raised and addressed. So I have no other questions. With that, I'll close the questions portion of the public hearing and we'll go into deliberations. And just to remind the board, we are deliberating on a special permit for non-conformities. So I'll ask the board members to kindly, govern the deliberations around the legal criteria for special permit. And with that, we'll start with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. But we have a pretty straightforward application here, with, you know, a dormer being added that meets all the setback requirements, a modest bump out that's going over the partial footprint of the deck. And while the addition will intensify a few of the nonconformities, it's obviously or clearly not creating any new nonconformities, but intensifying a couple. But I think it's an appropriate bump out for the house in the neighborhood, not egregious in any way, shape, or form. So I don't see, it's not creating new nonconformity. And with the size and scale and mass of this bump out addition, I don't see it being substantially more detrimental than to the neighborhood. So I can support this.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Moore. No new nonconformity here, and the modest size of the addition or the proposed addition is something that certainly I don't think, in my opinion, is going to be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. So I can support this also.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Yes, I too can support this. I was a little concerned because I haven't generally supported things that are 5 feet off the street and all of a sudden get to be 3 feet off the street. But having walked around the street, it's a little misleading because the property lines back up off the street and back up off of the sidewalk, and it's a pretty quiet little side street there on Coolidge. And then, as my colleagues have said, it's a modest addition, so I can support this.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Shannon?
Concur with the previous comments, and I can support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And I'll just note for the record, if nothing else, that the legal criteria for special permit for nonconformities is outlined in our zoning ordinance section 9B2. It's a two-pronged test. I agree with my colleagues in that it appears the applicants met, in my opinion, and it sounds like my colleagues, both prongs, that there are no new nonconformities being created, and that the proposed alteration is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure. In fact, it's not detrimental in my opinion at all, much less substantially more detrimental. Seems like my colleagues agree, so that's my only add-on. Seeing nothing else in deliberations, I think we can close deliberations and go to a vote. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve application at 34 Ashland Street for special permit for nonconformities, ZNC 21-13.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do we have a second?
I'll second Bud Shagnon.
All right, Mr. Shagnon is seconded. Motion's made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Shagnon. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the special permit for nonconformities on 34 Ashland Street is approved. Thank you, members of the ZBA. Thank you, Attorney Mead, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Moving to the second hearing on our agenda this evening. This is the application of Jonathan and Lindsay Green, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The application address is 33 Lafayette Street, and the applicant seeks all necessary permits for a special permit for nonconformities to add an upward extension of a secondary front yard setback nonconformity. With that, may we hear from the applicant. Attorney Mead, you have the floor again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street. With me this evening is Jonathan and Lindsay Green, who are the owners of the property, and Scott Brown, who is the architect for the project. The property, as noted, is at 33 Lafayette Street, and Jonathan and Lindsay are proposing to renovate their home, including an upward extension of a small bump out that's adjacent to Highland Avenue. This property sits at the corner of Lafayette and Highland Avenue. So there's no change to the proposed footprint. If you could go to the first slide, please. So the property is located in the R2 zoning district. I might add, just for the beginning, this property is considered historic under the ordinance, and we have already been to the Historic Commission who has released the demolition delay. So the property is in the R2 zoning district. It was constructed around 1920. As I said, it's at the corner of Lafayette Street and Highland Avenue. It has existing nonconformities for primary front yard at 13.8, where 25 is required, secondary front yard at 14.7 where 25 is required, and a lot coverage of 26.2 where 25 is the maximum allowed. Next slide, please. So the proposed project Scott is going to show you is to construct the second-story addition over the existing bump out on Highland Avenue. No changes are proposed to the footprint, and the proposed addition constitutes an upward extension of the existing secondary yard front setback on Highland Avenue. If you go to the next slide, please. So as you can see, here is John and Lindsay's home, sits at the corner of Highland and Lafayette. At the top of the plan, adjacent to Highland Avenue, is the bump out that I was speaking of. And that is where the addition is going to go. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to talk about the proposed addition.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Scott Brown, the architect for the project. Caitlin, if we could just go to slide 6, please. Great, thank you. So these are the proposed elevations for the project. At the bottom of the page is the front elevation as the house is viewed from Lafayette Street. On the right-hand side is where our proposed addition is. At the top of the page, this is the right side elevation as you would view this from Highland Ave. So this is a modest 4-bedroom house. It has 1 full bathroom for a family with 3 children. This project is about providing an additional 2nd floor bathroom, a closet for the primary bedroom, as well as a 1st floor powder room. It is a small house and we can't accomplish those goals within the existing footprint. And the only place where it makes sense to expand is over the existing bump out on the right side of the house. Our design direction for this is largely driven by what is behind those exterior walls and the need for privacy. This has resulted in a smaller window type that is different from the rest of the house. We've also decided to change up the siding type as well, going with a horizontal shiplap, and also some of the details, recognizing that this new work is just going to be different from the rest of the house. We are tying this addition into the existing house at the eave level, matching and wrapping the existing eave line around the addition. And also note that we've done our best to keep the height of this down. And I think that is very important because this property in addition is on a corner. Next slide, please. So this is the rear elevation, proposed rear elevation of the house. Not highly visible, not a lot going on here. Next slide, please. Existing photo, this is taken from the front left corner of the house on Lafayette. Over the right side, that is where we are proposing to do all of our work. Next slide, please. Again, this is from the opposite corner, closer to the corner of Lafayette and Highland. Next slide. And finally, as you would see this from Highland Ave. So, I think this is a small request. It is a modest addition to a small house. And I think what we're doing here is going to be very successful. And with that, I will turn it back over to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And if you could just go down to the next slide to give the board some context. So, and maybe below that up a little bit. So you can see this is right across from the hospital, and you can see the other homes in the neighborhood that have, pretty significant intensification on their lots. As I noted earlier, the footprint of this particular project is not changing at all. So with that, if you could go to the next slide, please. The applicant needs to show under section 9 that there will be no addition of a new nonconformity. And here, as I stated, there is no new nonconformity, merely the intensification of the upward extension of that secondary front yard setback. The next finding, of course, is that the proposed addition will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. Here, while there will be an upward extension, it will be constructed over the existing 1st floor bump out. The bump out with the 2nd floor addition will remain smaller and subservient to the existing 2-story home, while also complementing the existing architectural style of the home. The existing structure is 23 feet tall. The bump out addition is proposed to be 20 feet 5 inches. No change to the footprint of the structure and therefore no change to the open space or lot coverage. There will be no outward intensification of the nonconformity either. But for the property being a corner lot, the secondary front yard setback would be in conformance with the side yard setback at 14.7 where 10 is required. However, of course, as the change in the ordinance included the 25-yard setback on both the primary and secondary yard setback, front yard setbacks. So here we believe that the proposed addition is not substantially more detrimental to the existing structure or the structures in the neighborhood, and we would request the board approve the request put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. We'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions, public comment. We can put the slide up again. Anyone who wishes to speak, just kindly raise your hand and we will recognize you for the record. Going once, going twice, I still see no hands raised. So I'm going to close the public comment section of the public hearing and we'll go right to questions from the board, starting with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Trempetti. I found the presentation to be very straightforward, clear, covered all the points. I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Mead, the setback where the addition would be located, the Highland Avenue side, that's the 14.7 feet where 25 is required, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Going to Mr. Swanton.
No questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Shannon.
No questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. I too have no questions, so we can close the questions from the board section of the hearing and go to deliberations. And again, we're deliberating under the criteria of 9B2, 9B3, and on special permit for, 9B2, special permit for nonconformities. And with that, we will start with Mr. Moore in deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Trempetti. Again, it was a very straightforward, thorough presentation. There are no new nonconformities. There's no change to the footprint. It's a thoughtful, modest addition. So with no change to the building footprint, no new nonconformities introduced by the application, and a modest, basically topping off of a bump out that already exists. I don't see anything in the size, scale, and massing of this application, this proposal, that could result in any kind of judgment of substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. For those two reasons or multiple reasons, I can support this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will concur with Mr. Moore on this. I see that there's no new nonconformity, and I also, it's my opinion that the pre-existing structure or use is, not really going to be that highly modified here. We're going up a story, and it's sufficiently far removed from both streets. So I think that this seems like a good project, and I can support this.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I agree. It's modest. It's without new nonconformities, and it's fine relative to its neighborhood. So I can support it.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon.
I agree with my colleagues, and just like to say kudos to the design. I like the change in the siding, setting off the addition, and also a very interesting roof line where it ends at the attic window of the existing attic window. Very, very attractive. So I can support it. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with all of those comments. I too can support it. It's a nice design. It's a modest request. I think it complies with the criteria. Closing that portion of the public hearing, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 33 Lafayette Street, ZNC 21-14.
Second, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle, and thank you for the second, Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll on the motion to approve, Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Champion,
Yes.
and Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the application is approved. Thank you all members of the ZBA, and thank you, Attorney Mead, and good luck to your clients.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Moving now to the last public hearing on our agenda this evening. It is an application of Scott and Jean Clark, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman, and Costa LLC for the application address of 40 Winter Street. This application is a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant seeks all necessary permits or special permits, variances, and the related for a renovation and addition to the rear of a single-family structure. And again, this application is a special permit for nonconformities. May we hear from the applicant? And Attorney Mead, this is your application as well. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport. And with me this evening is Scott and Jean Clark, and this is their home. And their architect is Larry Reeves. Scott and Jean, you can go to the first slide, please. Scott and Jean proposed to renovate and construct an addition on the rear of their home. The property is located in the R2 zoning district, as well as the demolition control overlay district under the ordinance, and was constructed in or around 1920. What's really interesting about this application, and actually it's kind of interesting in the context of all the applications for the evening, it's been fun to kind of see different style homes in different areas of the city. In this particular application, while it's not necessarily germane so much to the board, it was to the Historic Commission. This house wasn't actually constructed on this lot at 40 Winter Street. The house was constructed across the street on Winter Street, down in the area of where Pleasant Street originally ran across Winter Street prior to the construction of the Route 1 corridor, and was moved to be located on this lot, which is one lot behind the High Street corner of Winter Street and High Street. So I just think it's an interesting story with this house, and the house itself is quite nice, as you're going to see shortly. But Scott and Jean appreciate that history and are making great strides at taking care of and restoring certain portions of the house, and some of the really kind of interesting and unique windows in particular that they have stored in their basement. So there is no Form B for the project, but it is listed on the district data sheets. And while we don't trigger the DCOD, we did have to go to the Historic Commission for a roof line change. The Historic Commission has approved these plans and released the demolition delay. So the property is currently non-conforming for lot area of 10,000 square feet, where 6,504, where 10,000 are required, and the property has 6,504. The frontage is at 57.5, where 90 feet is required, and the lot front yard setback requires 25. And this is a typo, I have to say. I'm going to correct on the slide. The actual front yard setback is at 19.7, not 10.9. So this slide is incorrect, but all of your filings are correct. So those are the nonconformities: lot area, frontage, front yard setback. Both side yards, rear setback, building height, lot coverage, and open space are all conforming, and they will continue to be conforming after the addition is built, if you approve it, and none of the existing nonconformities are actually intensified or changed. We're here because the lot has insufficient area and frontage, and the addition is more than 500 square feet. Next slide, please. So what Jean and Scott are proposing to do is to construct an addition on the rear of the home. The addition overlays a portion of the existing roof, which is why we were in front of the Historic Commission. It doesn't alter or extend any of the existing nonconformities, as I said a minute ago. And The capacity for off-street parking actually is increased because the driveway shifts on the opposite side of the house in order to allow room for the addition in the back. The addition does add more than 500 square feet, as I said to you earlier. It actually adds 767 square feet, including the newly usable space in the attic. And as I noted, the Historic Commission did release the demolition delay. Next slide, please. So if you could blow this up a little bit, please, Caitlin. So here is the addition, which is highlighted in yellow on this site plan. You'll notice that under the yellow, and this is going to become more evident when we show you the elevations, but the existing structure, there's a portion of the existing structure that's being removed, which is underneath. You can kind of see it underneath the yellow or orange color, but we wanted to show you so you could see the actual location of the addition, so there wasn't any confusion about where it was located. And it does overlay part of the removed structure and the roof that's going to be overlaid. And again, none of the existing nonconformities are exacerbated, and it doesn't create any new nonconformities. Next slide, please. So here are the elevations, and Larry actually did a great job at being able to have us help walk through this. You can see the proposed conditions are on the top, and the existing conditions of the same elevations are right under. So you can just look and see the changes. So as you can see in the upper left-hand side, we have that red line going down. That is the existing structure, and you can see it lines up with the structure underneath. So you can see where the addition is actually being added on the rear, and it carries along the same design of the roof lines. It carries along the eave line and ties in nicely with the existing design and architectural style of the structure. And so if you look at the elevation for the front elevation, which is on the right-hand side of this drawing, again, the front elevation doesn't change at all. And you can see in the back where the new addition will go, which is lower in roof height than the existing main part of the structure, which is more towards Winter Street. Next slide, please. Actually, if you could I just want to point one other thing out on the, thank you, go back. The other thing that you'll note, and it doesn't really have a big issue with the zoning board, but I wanted to note that there's a new roof that's going to be over that side door in the left-hand elevation with new brackets, which we'll be able to see it a little bit more. You can see it on the front elevation off to the left-hand side. So there's a roof there now, but it's going to be removed and reconstructed. Next slide, please. So here's the right side elevation. So as you're standing at the front of the house, it's the right side elevation. And again, you can see where the new addition is versus where the existing structure is. And we just thought that that was important to be able to see how that all lines up. So that is the new addition on the top left-hand side, which is the right side elevation. And again, the rear elevation on the opposite side, on the right-hand side of the drawing, you can see in the lower what existing looks like, and the upper what the proposed looks like. Again, it's lower than the main part of the roof and steps in on that side as well. So if you could go, while I'm on this, let me just say a couple of things about the details. There'll be architectural shingles will be used on all the roofs. The 2/1 windows, we showed a match to try to carry along the windows that exist in the current house. You can see that the current house has a very unique 3 or 4/1 window. There are a number of those, which I'm going to show you photos of in a minute, that are going to be replaced and restored in the original house. And there's a very unique window that's on the elevation ahead of this. If you could go back to the prior elevation a minute. So on the left-hand side, which is the left side elevation, if you can see that window in the first floor that's horizontal instead of vertical, That window is actually going to be, it's an original, and they have restored it and found it in the basement, and it's going to be reinserted. So if you could go to the next slide down. Also, the house is currently covered with aluminum siding or vinyl siding, excuse me. That's going to all be removed, and depending on the condition of the clapboards underneath, they're either going to be repaired, or new clapboards with the same reveal will be used in their place. But that investigation hasn't fully taken place, except for to say that the siding that's currently covering the clapboards will be all removed. Next slide, please. And this is just to show the context of the house. I would note that we have a letter of support from the property at 180 High Street, which is right next door on the left-hand side, which is the side that the addition is being constructed on. Next slide, please. And then we took some contextual photographs for the board. So this is across the street from Summer Street. Next slide, please. And this is the view coming up Winter Street. Of course, Winter Street is one way. It's the White House, not the Yellow House. Next slide, please. And this is from the corner of Winter and High. So you will be able to see the addition, obviously, from this view. Next slide, please. Of course, people travel up Winter and not down Winter. This is the view from the rail trail just on the Washington Street side. So you can see the roof line you'll be able to see, but you actually won't be able to see the addition from the rail trail. Next slide, please. And this is the opposite. So obviously when you're down on the rail trail beneath High Street, you can't see the house. So that would be going in the opposite direction. Next slide, please. So the boards, as we've said previously, the board's standard here is under section 9. The first is that there will be no new nonconformities. In this instance, not only are there not any new nonconformities, the applicant isn't intensifying any nonconformities or exacerbating any nonconformities. The addition fully meets all of the dimensional requirements of the ordinance. Next is that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. And here we believe that by constructing the addition to the rear and to the left side of the property in a way that is entirely conforming with the dimensional requirements, the Clarks have been mindful to be sure that the proposed addition minimizes its impacts on the surrounding neighborhood by not creating any new nonconformities or extending any existing nonconformities. Also, the design of the proposed addition doesn't radically alter the appearance of the structure. Rather, in fact, it is complementary to it, which was a comment made by the Historic Commission. The addition is similar in form and style to the existing structure as well, and that's on purpose because the way that the roof lines integrate into the existing roof. While it overlays the rear portion of the existing structure, the proposed addition doesn't interfere with the hip style roof that's found on many structures of its similar style. And other than the left side of the structure, the addition will be minimally visible from the front right side or rear given its location. The rear of the structure is not visible. The right side also doesn't have as much visibility due to its close proximity to the other neighboring structure. And the right side of the addition is being stepped in from the existing structure also. Additionally, as I mentioned, there are a number of other benefits. Obviously, the exposure of the either the existing siding underneath or new siding at the same reveal, the reinstallation of some of the more unique windows and the rehabilitation and restoration of the rest of the existing windows. And as I noted, the removal of the aluminum siding, as I indicated earlier, it is aluminum, not vinyl. Next slide, please. Again, I just wanted to show you. So here are some of the double hung windows with decorative sashes that are being fully restored. Next slide, please. And here's that really interesting decorative window also that will be reinstalled into the south elevation. And with that, the applicants will request that the board approve the request for a special permit for non-conformities, as we believe the applicant meets the requirements as set forth in the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. We'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to public comment. Anyone wish to speak in connection with this application, just kindly raise your hand, bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will recognize you for any comment. Seeing no hands, going once, going twice. I will close that portion of the public hearing and we'll go right into questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Okay, Mr. Chimpetti, I'll just cut to the quick, very detailed presentation. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle?
I had two questions, Attorney Mead. The first, I think, is more substantive than the second. The first is was there a roof deck on the third story?
It's a balcony. So,
Balcony.
yeah, so see it's inset. Mr. Delisle, so you see the rear elevation?
Yeah,
Right,
I see it in the middle of the third floor there. Okay.
that's correct.
Okay. Okay. How big is the addition square footage? I know that the square footage wise, excuse me. I know that the relief sought was greater than 500 square feet as is required, but what is the actual size of the addition?
So I'm going to tell you what it's not a net, it's an actual number, right? So the current house is 2017 square feet, right? So when you put the addition on, it's an additional 767 square feet. And I'm going to tell you how it's broken down. It's 308 square feet on the first floor, 314 square feet on the second floor. And then because of the reconfiguration of the attic and the kind of extension there, they're going to be able to use the attic at 143 square feet.
And as you get to those net figures for the first floor and presumably the second floor also, in the presentation you indicated that there was a portion of the house that's going away, correct? So you're adding some and you're taking some away, and you get to that the figure, the 2017 plus the 767, correct?
So the end number is 2017 plus 767.
Got it. Okay. And then my last question relates to the windows that are being relocated. Those look really neat. Are they going in the original locations that they were in historically speaking?
Yes, they're going into the original house. You'll see the addition has the 2/1s, except for that back view, which has 2/2s in the center of the first floor. So all of the original windows are going back into the original structure.
Right. I was wondering if the horizontally oriented window and the window above that were going back into the locations where they were historically in the house.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, neat. All right. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Lau, was that the extent of your questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Mr. Swanton?
Yes, first I'd like to say I appreciate these elevation drawings with the before on the bottom and the after on the top. It makes it simple to follow them. Thank you. This is a house that I actually looked at when I was looking in Newburyport, and it's got some pretty interior as well that hasn't come up here, and I know it's irrelevant, but I'm glad to see the owners are taking care of it and making these improvements and doing it mindfully. I was concerned about the massing and the sizing, but in walking around this place, I had to laugh. That picture from the rail trail is what it looks like. You're looking at a wall, basically. So it's, I think it's tastefully done. I don't really have any questions, so I pass.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Shea.
Mr. Champetti, can I just, I need to correct myself from a
Sure.
minute ago. I was just informed, actually, in relationship to Mr. Delisle's question. The horizontal window is actually going back into a new space, which is in the dining room, I guess. So if you go back up to the slide above. So you see that above on the left-hand, the left side elevation, do you see that horizontal window? That's where the old horizontal window is going in to that location right there.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yep, thank you. All right, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Chagnon.
All right, no worries. Mr. Chagnon, you're up.
An excellent interruption. Thank you. I've got no further questions. All the questions I had were asked, and a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chagnon. I have nothing further to add as well. So we can close that portion of the public hearing and move into the deliberations. And again, in deliberations, I'll just ask that our members tailor your deliberations around 9B2, which is the criteria for a special permit for non-conformity. So we'll start with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think this is a really thoughtful addition to an interesting house with an interesting story. So all around, well done for the applicant. The hurdles that we have to look at with the special permit for non-conformities will be there's no new non-conformities. We've already established that with the presentation. And then while there is a substantial change to the property, this is not an insignificant addition. It will not increase lot coverage past dimensional controls nor decrease open space anywhere near minimum required. Rear setback again is decreased, but well within the bounds. So, any way you look at this, it's a meaningful addition, but all within controls by a long shot. And there's a lot of thought given to what's going on. I can't see because, as was pointed out, I believe by Mr. Swanton, you really can't see it from the rail trail. So people that would be most affected, or butters that most affected, there are two, and one of them has said no problem with, has no problem with it, and they're going to be closest to it. So that's also, I think, worth noting. So with all that said, I don't see how this can be seen as substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood with respect to size scale massing, although it is significant. It's well within dimensional controls, and I can support it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle?
Once again, I'm going to agree with Mr. Moore's analysis. When I first saw the drawings, I was concerned about the massing and the size of the addition, but after going by the location, that sort of allayed my fears, and then getting the more details this evening certainly put those to rest. So I agree with Mr. Moore that there is no new non-conformity, and this proposed addition would not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And I can also support this project.
Very good. Mr. Swanton?
I too can find no new nonconformities, and I too believe it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, so therefore I can support it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon?
I agree with my colleagues. I'll restate, when I first looked at the drawings, I was concerned about massing, but as you do drive by, and the fact that they stepped back the addition on the right side, if you will, away from High Street, I think was smart. I think it's fairly well hidden and very tastefully done. So as my colleagues have stated, I can support the application.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chagnon. I concur, and I too can support it. And I think the applicants met all the necessary criteria. So I'll close that portion of the public hearing and we'll go to a vote. We have a, sorry, I will go to a motion. Do we have a motion from a member of the ZBA to approve the application?
This is Mr. Shagnon. I'll make a motion to approve the application for 40 Winter Street, ZNC 21-15, renovations in addition to the rear of a single-family structure.
Second, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chagnon and Mr. Swanton. On the second, motion's been made and seconded, calling the roll. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes,
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Thank you very much, members of the ZBA. Thank you, Attorney Mead, and good luck to Scott and Janine. I'm sorry, to Jean Clark, your clients.
Thank you very much, members of the board. Have a good evening.
Have a great evening. All right, members of the ZBA, that concludes our public hearings for this evening. So with that, we can close that portion of the of our meeting and go right into our business meeting. Before us is the approval of our minutes from the meeting of January 11th. Do we have any comments, changes, revisions, or in the absence, do we have a motion to approve?
I move we approve the minutes, Ken Swanton.
All right,
Seconded, Mark Moore.
motion's made and seconded. All those in favor, well, let me just call the roll. Motion to approve the minutes made and seconded. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
yes,
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. I'm going out of order to keep you guys awake.
Yeah.
5 in the affirmative, the ayes have it, and the minutes have been approved. Other updates from the chair or planning director. I think most of you may be aware that we had a sort of a joint Zoom call that included myself, Bonnie Sontag, the chairperson of the planning board, as well as Councilor McCauley, and there were Andy, who else was on? Of course, Andy Port was on the call, and Copeland and Page. It was all with an effort to discuss the merits of the two ordinances on short-term rental units. And Andy, what was there was?
Yeah, Jennifer Blanchet, the zoning administrator, was there,
Yes,
and
Jennifer
Cameron,
and
chair of the
Council
Planning and
Chair.
Development Committee.
Yep, and also our council president, Councilor Shannon, was there. So
Exactly.
basically the goal was to just flesh this out. It seems like the momentum is now moving away from a layered, duplicated process of approval that includes a license from the licensing commission as well as a special permit from the ZBA. And I expressed to them our concern about absorption and docket limit. And, I just shared with them the math that we had all discussed about absorption. If we surrendered 20% or one application of our 5 docket meeting every single meeting, it would take 6.53 years to absorb the 158 special permit, 158 short-term rentals that are currently known, if they all had to come before us. And of course, we would only get halfway through that before we would have to reset the docket, because according to the script of the ordinance now, they require a re-up every 3 years. So we were sort of mathematically doomed to go down by the head, to sink one compartment at a time. I feel that and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, if you disagree, but it seemed pretty clear that the remaining member of the council who co-sponsored this, Councilor McCauley, was more than amenable to conceding the the duplicated 2-prong approach in favor of just the most efficient way to get it done. It seems like folks are leaning toward licensing only. And if there's some objection to, and the licensing would start with the predicate of zoning review, whether they complied with whether they complied with the prerequisites would be a determination made by our zoning codes administrator, or our zoning codes commissioner, an enforcement officer who's Jennifer Blanchet. She would make a finding, and then they would get to go in before the licensing commission for their license. If someone was aggrieved by that determination, presumably if they felt they were unfairly given a no by Jennifer Blanchet, they could appeal that finding to us, and we would deal with those. In the absence of that, it would go and flow through the planning office, and it would first be met with Jennifer Blanchet's review, and then the licensing commission. I'm in favor of that. I know we all agreed that that was a better, more streamlined approach. It seems like that's the way they're going. I plan, and I invite anyone who wishes to log in on February 2nd for the council hearing to share any thoughts, but I'm happy to represent our collective thoughts. If those thoughts that I just sort of summarized, if those seem to be a fair representation of what we all feel, I'm happy to just simply say that that there's unanimity of our board in this sentiment that we feel it's more efficient, that it continue to go in this momentum. Licensing commission only, no need to duplicate the process and have it come before us as well. Anybody have any thoughts or anything to add to that?
No, that covers it all.
Chair, this is Andy, if I could.
Sure.
Just a very well summarized, Chair. I would also add, just as additional clarification, part of the basis of our discussion and Councilor McCauley's understanding that the special permit may not be necessary was discussion about the fact that primarily this came from some assumptions that abutter issues could be addressed by way of an initial permit. In the sense that if an operation, a short-term rental unit is underway and there are abutter concerns, that it could be shut down sort of preemptively. And it was determined in that conversation, it was better understood that enforcement issues are better addressed on the tail end by revoking a license or shutting down an operation that way, rather than actually a more complicated process of trying to unwind a special permit and deal with preemptively abutter issues that are not known until the time of operation.
Yeah, that's correct. And so that's definitely a fair, sort of clarification. I think it's going in the right direction, to just some, my personal thoughts. And I'm happy that it's going in this direction. It felt for a short period of time that it was, government run
If I
amok.
could make one comment.
Sure.
Hello? Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly concur that we should not be involved because we don't have the time. I wouldn't presume to know how to do it better or, how it's all done or whatnot. Other people are looking at that, but I thoroughly concur that with your assertion that we should not be involved because we don't have the time. And I thoroughly concur with that, but I wouldn't want to try to tell them how to do it because I really have no knowledge. But I agree with you.
They just, I'm just sharing with you what the consensus of the conversation was beyond the relevance of my involvement was to share our concerns about how I felt it would impact the efficiency and economy of a public process to involve us as a duplicated layer, but also on behalf of us as volunteer members of a city board, and the reality of our docket and the workload that we currently bear as as volunteers is tedious and granular and requires a lot of focus into the late evening. It's hard to think of doing any more than we currently do.
I 100% agree. We should back you up in that. I mean, we said it last time. If you need us to say it again, we should say it again. But I 100% agree with you, and I think we all do, that we don't have the time to take this on.
Yeah, and with everyone's kind of assent, that's how I plan to represent it. There's no need for everyone to come say the same thing. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting out over my skis, as they say, right? To make some representation on behalf of all of us, without just making sure that I said what I thought I would represent, and make sure that everyone kind of concurs with the spirit of that. And I'll just share, it's everything that I'm about, that I would say, and everything I just said, I've said to them before. And I know Andy has as well. So it's not going to come as any shock to anyone in this constituency group that this is how we feel as a board, and the reasons why. But I'll just restate it because it's a public forum, and we'll let the chips fall where they fall. But it looks like it's going the right way. Fingers crossed. Anything else on short-term rental units? I've asked Caitlin and Andy to put on our agenda for next meeting on February 8th, a discussion published on the agenda. So it's, a formality, the undertaking of the formality of us discussing and then hopefully voting on a board bylaw that we would hold ourselves and applicants accountable to, and the planning office would help us police it, which would limit any hearing to no more than 5 applications. And we'll just use that as a starting point to try to focus in our energy so that neither we nor members of the public are sitting around past 11 o'clock, only to get bumped to the next flight or, get bounced because we can't get to it. And it's just not fair, to be honest. It's really just not fair on the focus that's incumbent upon us to do this work, credibly. it's hard to do that at 11:30 after working, a full day and having families and having lives. So I think that in the spirit of our longevity, it's a necessary safety net that I think we need to build in. So those are my thoughts on it. I've asked Caitlin to put it on the agenda. We can discuss it out loud, and then we'll see where it goes and vote on it and see if we can implement it and, have it take action right away so everyone's on the same page.
Sounds good.
I got nothing else. Andy, did you have anything else?
Not on short-term rental units. On the one remaining item, I guess, on the agenda, the fee schedule update.
Oh, are we, okay. Did you want to just let us
If that's
know?
okay.
I didn't know anything about that, so I figured you'd speak on that.
Sorry, Caitlin, do you mind just widening that a little bit? I just want to make sure folks can read. Thank you. The long story short is, it's pretty typical. Our fee schedules aren't updated very frequently, but we've determined, looking at, Diane Bover, who is our office coordinator, we look at our budget sort of periodically and just kind of get a determination as we look to the next budget cycle, how much we're spending versus how much we're taking in for things like note takers, any expenses, legal services and so forth that might be involved. And long story short, we're recommending an increase in the application fees to cover some of that, and also the advertisement fees that need some adjustments. So here we're just asking, as we are with the planning board at their upcoming meeting, just for a slight adjustment in the fee schedules. This is in order to essentially make sure that applicants are paying, a reasonable portion of the application fee, and the taxpayers essentially are not expected to subsidize that on the other end, which would be the alternative here in general.
Very good. Okay. Anything else?
I would just, if the board's inclined, I would just ask for a motion to approve the revised fee schedule. And like I said, we'll be doing the same thing with the planning board for the same reasons.
Does the board wish to undertake any discussion on the proposed fee schedule? And if so, do we want to go round robin and talk about that? Looks like Mr. Moore wants to be heard, so why don't we start there?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. When was the last time the fees were adjusted?
It may have been 10 years ago about. I think it was
Wow,
probably the first or second year maybe I started working here, so it's quite a while.
Quite a while. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I have a question. He asked my first question, but I remember we had an applicant, happened to be a neighbor of mine, so I had recused myself, but I was listening. And they were, excuse me, it was just a homeowner. And she said, I got to pay like $700 to be in front of you guys for this little thing. She was just doing a little thing. I mean, some of these big guys come in with these big projects and they take hours, and we get continued 4 times, and we spend hours and hours and hours. And then you have a little neighbor who comes in who spends 15 minutes and they're out of here. I guess my question is, do we distinguish at all in these fees between the people who really suck up all the time of our planning department and our time, or does everybody charge the same amount? Whether you're a 5-minute plan or 5-hour plan, you pay the same amount. It's
Ken, it's basically it's a flat fee, all you can eat buffet, whether you go up once or go up 50 times. The fees are the fees, and there's no ability to charge a sliding scale fee for bigger applications that I can think of that's practical, because how in the world would we would it get policed? But
well, like, for example, you could charge more for a variance than you do for a special permit, for example. I mean, I don't know. I just ever since my neighbor said that, I've never met this woman. I couldn't even pick her out of a lineup, but it's always kind of stuck at me.
Yeah, this is Andy. I would think it's a great question, Ken, and certainly there's some ability or some degree of ability to have a scale based on the type of permit, if you will. Clearly, as the chair mentioned, for categorically, you're gonna have to keep the same fee for all those categories, but there may be the ability to make an adjustment, in part to address the concern you raised. But generally speaking, we always try to make sure there's a nexus between, as you pointed out, between the workload required by the board or the staff and so forth in proportion to the project. So for instance, just pulling something out of a hat, even though this board may not be the one that reviews something in Waterfront West, it might be reasonable to conclude that a large project or a large development scheme like that would have a much more substantial review fee or process involved for everyone involved, rather than say the small, homeowner who's making an adjustment that does not take a substantial amount of time before the board. So certainly we can have some more discussion about, granular, breakdown, but generally speaking, like the chair said, there's pretty much a consistency across the Commonwealth generally with having one fee per permit type, if you will, generally.
Does that address some of your question, Ken?
I guess,
I mean, it doesn't have to.
I
I'm just curious.
Some of our applicants, they just take an awful lot of our time, and they should be charged more than the poor homeowner who spends 5 minutes in here.
I don't disagree in terms of balance and equity. In an ideal, though, fantasy world, we would charge application fees at the end of the application.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have to do that. But boy, wouldn't it be balanced and fair? But that said, I think in the interest of of equity and just transparency, and in an interest of treating the public, of which we are a member, right? As volunteer members, we're not elected officials. We should take very seriously any endeavor to increase costs and fees, because that often translates directly into access. This is I think a modest escalation, though it's not a small amount of money. It's $50 per application. But I guess I'm persuaded a little bit by the fact that we haven't changed it in quite a while. So it should be, it's absorbed over a longer period of time. It's not as though this is an annual escalation, but we can go around and sort of get everyone's thoughts and then take a vote, see where it lands. Mr. Ken, did you want to say anything else? Was that the extent of your thoughts on
No,
this?
I'm curious how other people do it. And if we haven't looked at it in 10 years, maybe some other cities, actually, I think somebody told me, one of our counselors told me recently, we're the smallest city in the state. So, I mean, but maybe some other people have come up with other ways to do this. I don't know. I just don't like, I think I wish there was a way to not stick it to the person who comes in here for 10 minutes. That's all.
Well, I mean, we have we have the discretion as a board to adopt, reject, or request further review, and ask Andy and the planning office's indulgence to maybe examine, is there another fee schedule structure that might be more applicable to the concerns that you've raised, the disparity of access and applicant. That would be, just really taking one more meeting's worth of time to, to drill into this a little bit more deeply before we endeavor to vote to, jack up fees equally across the board by this amount. So we can do that. If that's it sounds like that's your sentiment on.
I'm just suggesting pick 5 comparables, 20,000 person municipalities, and what do they charge? Just curious.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Andy, I'm going to just kind of I'd love to just go around and hear what everyone's thoughts are, and then we can take it further from there. But Stephen, what do you think?
I think that, these are in the nature of a filing fee rather than something that is geared towards project size. I mean, if you wanted to get into sort of a per square footage sort of sliding scale, I think that would be really complicated, Ken. And you get into some weird things where you've got like a variance as opposed to a special permit for non-conformities to build an addition, but you wanted a variance to, it would just get, because you're talking about apples and oranges to some degree here, especially when you factor in, an appeal, or what is the publication or the publication fee, which probably, Andy, I would imagine goes right mostly to the newspaper, notwithstanding, whatever bit the town takes for their portion. But I do think these are in the nature of a filing fee, like if you were filing a complaint in a court, or if you were going to renew your driver's license or something like that. These are just user fees, and it's not really geared towards, I don't think it's geared towards a sort of sliding scales for the size of the project.
Bud, what are your thoughts? Thank you, Steve.
I guess I agree a little bit with the fact that some of these fees are quite expensive. I mean, I remember filing for a variance 25 years ago, and my filing fee was $25. And I think in 25 years, things haven't gone up tenfold. But I think what it is municipalities are trying to justify their existence and make money versus spending money, where there used to be a social responsibility that our municipalities were there to support, the homeowners. The one that drives me nuts is the publication and abutters fees. So if we looked at Merrimack Street, he's got a variance and a special permit, and he's got the publications and abutters fees. He's in for $1,000 just to come and stand in front of us. That's a big chunk of money. Now, I know that project can afford it, but as one of my colleagues just said, some of these poor people are spending $700 to come and ask for a bump out on their house. Some of it just seems a little out of line, but I understand it is the way of the future. The one that sticks out the most to me is the publication and abutters fees. That's going up 42%. I'm not sure in the next 10 years there'll be any newspapers for us to publish in anyways. So I'm not sure if that's going to be appropriate going forward. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, as I kind of think about it a little bit more as I'm listening to everyone's comments, I think that unlike, say, a building permit, which is tied to the value of the project and is scaled an application fee or user fee based on that, this is a pretty universal kind of set of fees. It really looks like everything's $250 with the exception of publication and a butters list. And I don't necessarily know that a variance, should be more or less because it's a variance. To maybe Ken's point, I've seen special permits that are onerous and granular, and I've seen variances that were, a walk in the park. Although we haven't seen those, recently. They exist. Variances sought in our now Innovation and Business Park, the artist formerly known as the Industrial Park. We would see those often, and by their very nature, it requires a variance, but those tended to go very smoothly. So I don't think we should, pick one and say variances are harder. They're harder to obtain from a board, therefore they should cost more necessarily. But we can table this if everyone feels more comfortable doing that and revisit it next meeting, give it some more thought, give maybe Ken an opportunity or others to take a peek at what else is out there. I do think, after 10 years, we should try to address it. If we decide to bounce, our kind of decision on this until the next hearing, give ourselves more time. I think we should try to endeavor to get a decision on it, yes or no, by the 8th. Andy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks. Just a clarification, obviously from the office's perspective, we're just trying to cover the basic, and this is a very minimal relative cost compared to if you actually look at what it costs to run the planning department and the permit services and so forth that we have to process. So as the chair mentioned, the building permits are actually in sliding scale proportion of the project. That department, if you take permits into account, actually takes in far more revenue than is necessary to run that department, in terms of staffing. Whereas on the planning and zoning side, for those types of permits, we don't, offset that, unfortunately, in what we take in on fees. So it's not, relatively speaking, not as significant. It's not as if it's sort of a justification for existence. It's actually really to try to offset more of the cost of what is actually required for this process for each application that's being brought before the board. The other thing I'd note, I guess, is just that the abutter notices, that's actually not even something we're really directly able to control. We have to have a local paper that we give deference on what that fee is going to be based on, size of the notice, and the statutes require those notices. So it's not as if, I completely agree with that. Frankly, with today's technology, one might wonder why can't notice be given on a city or town website or some other format, at more access, maybe 24/7, and less cost to a municipality or applicant, homeowner. But unfortunately, that is again part of the process under the state statutes. Never mind anything we have here locally. So just for context.
Andy, are these fees, aren't they swept into the general fund, the general treasury and budget? Or do you guys get to keep these fees as part of the budget of the office?
Yeah, the city structure is not organized completely through the general budget, of course. So there's separate line items or separate budgets for revolving accounts, if you will. So the revenues that are coming in for planning and zoning permits, for instance, are put in the revolving fund. There's an expectation that 50% of that be used to pay for note taker services for the various boards, and of course that's a number of meetings throughout the year, number of hours and so forth. And then there's some other things that have to be paid for out of that. So again, what we're getting at is that we're not taking in enough revenue to offset that. There actually was some conversations in the last year or two. There was a confusion, I think, between our department and the mayor's office about whether or not legal services, general legal services related to land use issues should be paid for out of that account. And that fund was actually depleted much further during that period of time as a consequence of that. And we sort of corrected that by, clarifying that really should be paid for out of the general legal services of the municipality, rather than assuming that the relatively low fees coming in would be able to offset, legal services required, in proportion to what was going on. So, but again, we're trying to just make sure that those fees that are coming in are, minimally enough to pay for minute taker services and other, needs of the department that are not, covered right now. So otherwise, we're going back to the city council and saying, all right, can you increase the general budget to offset what it, costs to pay for note takers, for instance? So, again, we don't see it as a very significant fee increase. We understand, of course, any fee is a cost, and we understand, of course, we could have a sliding scale, discussion about where to make adjustments, but depending on how we categorize those, that may require more intricate work into which section of the ordinance are we referring to, which type of relief is being requested. Is there any way to put a scale to it based on square footage or something like that? And those may be more complicated discussions, to the point that Mr. Delisle made earlier. There's in some ways benefit or logic behind keeping a simple fee structure, at the outset, recognizing that, maybe we need to increase that number, or as some members have pointed out tonight, we could look at having further subdivision of those fees into a spectrum of some type.
All right.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
All I'm asking is just take 1 month. Either the city can look up what 5 or 8 other municipalities are charging, or I'll be happy to do it. While you guys were talking, I looked up the town of Andover, and they charge $100 for a 1 to 2 family residential, $250 if you're multi-family residential. They charge $160 for legal advertisements and $105 for recording it at the end of the day. So you can add those numbers up. I mean, to me, I keep thinking back to my neighbor who was complaining to us about this $750 fee for her little project. And I just would like to look at 5 other towns. And if you guys don't want to look it up, I'll be happy to look them up and send them around. And then I'll be happy to vote on this. I just would like to not do it in a vacuum. I'd like to see what other people are charging, how they're handling this, if there's any way to generate equity. So I'm just asking for a 1 month.
Yeah, sure. We will devote some staff time between now and then. Certainly, if you want to look on your end, we're willing to take and look at that information as well. But we will devote some staff time between now and then to do that. I would just suggest keeping in mind that just because a project is done by a homeowner, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a lengthy hearing associated with that based on the scope of work involved or the relief being requested and so forth. So, the demolition control overlay district is an involved review that is there for a reason. That may take some longer process associated with, say, a special permit or a variance or something else going on. That doesn't, just because it's a single or 2 family home doesn't necessarily mean that application won't take you as much time or won't be as involved for staff, for instance.
All right. Why don't we put this on for the 28th of February, and we'll revisit it then. Is that agreeable to everybody? And we'll see what we can find out in the meantime.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Andy, that's what we'll just put this back onto our agenda for next time. We don't need to take a vote on that. This is a discussion.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, is there anything else? All right, I think that's it. Do we have a motion to adjourn this evening?
I'll make a motion to adjourn for this evening.
All
I'll
right,
second it.
motion's made and seconded. All that you can just respond with aye or nay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? How dare you? All right, no nays, all ayes. The motion carries, meeting is adjourned, and have a great night, everyone. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Gretchen, and thank you, Andy, and everyone else, members. Have a great night. Thanks for being here.
8:30.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good
Good
night.
night.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.